If you feel weighed down by negative thoughts that pull you deeper into despair, listen to the story of a beggar who was lost in darkness until one single positive thought changed his life. In the bustling streets of an ancient city lived a man named Rafiq who. The morning air was sharp with the scent of roasting chestnuts and freshly swept stone alleys. The golden sun peeked over the domes and minarets, casting long fingers of light across the crowded marketplace. Rafiq sat curled beside a worn wooden cart, his tattered cloak barely shielding him from the cool air. His eyes, clouded with years of hardship, scanned the passers-by, not for faces, but for coins. Despite his ragged appearance, Rafiq carried the quiet dignity of a man who once had dreams. There was a flicker of gentleness in the way. He watched the children without toys laughing gleefully as they darted between vendors. There was a softness in his smile when he shared the last piece of dry bread with an old stray dog that followed him. Every day began similarly for Rafiq, awakening with the faintest ache in his bones, rubbing the dirt from his eyes. He slowly rose from his narrow corner beneath a crumbling stone archway. The city smelled of smoke and spice, the chatter of merchants and the clatter of hooves on cobblestone forming a persistent, chaotic symphony. Yet in that symphony, Rafiq heard only silence, a silence heavier than the weight pressing down on his chest. He remembered another time, long ago, when hope hummed within him like spring water rushing through stones. He had once dreamed of a life beyond begging, of wielding tools and building something he could call his own. But hope had run thin with the years, replaced by biting cold nights and empty hands. One afternoon, as the sun reached its zenith and sweat slicked his forehead, a small voice broke through his fog of gloom. A girl, no older than 8, knelt beside him, her cheeks flushed from the summer heat. She held out a tiny bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked from the roadside. "Here," she said softly, "for you." Rafiq's fingers trembled as he accepted the crude offering, surprise piercing his hollow heart. "Thank you, little one," he murmured. The girl's smile was bright as a candle in the dark. For a brief moment, the city's noise dimmed, and hope flickered faintly back to life. But days passed, and Rafiq's routine remained unchanged. The flower wilted by the second dawn, and the gnawing despair returned with its old weight. Coins were scarce, and hunger carved deeper into his insides. The eyes of merchants and travelers averted when they passed. Whispers followed him like shadows: drunkard, lazy, worthless. At the crowded fountain where water shimmered like shards of glass, a group of street boys jeered when Rafiq tried to fill his cracked tin cup. "Go away, old man. No room here." He lowered his head, cheeks burning with shame. Just yesterday, a young woman had muttered sharply as she stepped over his outstretched hand. "Begging won't get you anywhere." Rafiq wanted to shout back, to tell them about the man he once was, about the son he had failed to protect and the dreams he had buried. But all that escaped was a hollow silence, heavier than any stone tied around his ankles. One evening, cold and hungry, he found himself near the city's ancient gate, watching the lights flicker and the shadows stretch long and thin. The buzz of laughter and music drifted from a nearby tavern where life pulsed vibrant and bright, so different from his own. The ache in his chest unfurled into a sharp pain, and tears blurred his vision. How had he fallen so far? Some nights he cursed the world for forgetting him, others he cursed himself more fiercely. Then at the edge of the square, he noticed an old man sitting quietly under a sycamore tree. His robe was dusty but clean, and his eyes sparkled with a calm wisdom. The man's gaze seemed to look through the crowd and settle directly on Rafiq. With hesitance clawing at his throat, Rafiq approached. "Why do you sit apart from the world?" Rafiq asked, his voice rough like gravel. The old man smiled gently. "Because sometimes, to understand the world, one must first understand oneself." Rafiq shifted uncomfortably. "I have nothing left to understand. I am nothing." "Ah," the old man replied, "but everything begins from a single thought." Rafiq blinked, confusion knitting his brows. "Tell me, Rafiq," the old man said softly, "what was the last thought that passed through your mind? Have you ever noticed how one small idea can change the whole day? That question lingered in the air, strange and heavy. I don't know, Rafiq admitted, bitterness coating his words. Mostly I think about my failures, how I ended up here, how no one cares. The old man nodded as if he understood 1,000 unspoken words. Let me tell you a story, the old man began, his voice low and warm as dusk settling over hills. A story about the power hidden inside just one positive thought. Rafiq felt a flicker of curiosity, the faintest ember of interest amid the ruins of his spirit. Are you ready to understand? The old man asked, looking deep into Rafiq's eyes. His gaze was steady and unwavering, as if he could see the tangled pathways of Rafiq's mind. Rafiq swallowed hard and nodded. The old man took a slow breath and began. The tale was about a traveler who crossed scorching deserts, faced howling storms, and stood alone against shadows darker than night. But with a single thought, a spark of hope, the traveler found light where none seemed possible. As the old man spoke, the bustling city seemed to fade, replaced by deserts stretching endlessly. Rafiq listened, rapt, feeling something stir deep inside, a tiny bud of possibility. The story's words wrapped around him, weaving warmth into his cold limbs and light into his heavy heart. When the old man finally paused, the street noises crept back, and the smell of roasting chestnuts returned, but Rafiq remained still, caught between the ending of one world and the beginning of another. The old man's eyes twinkled. Do you see, Rafiq? One thought can be the heartbeat that awakens a soul. Rafiq nodded slowly, a fragile hope beginning to break through the walls he had built. The night air was cool now, whispering promises of change. And for the first time in many years, Rafiq felt a stirring, an unfamiliar sensation, a faint glow of something he had long forgotten. Possibility. The old man smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the fading light like twin lamps guiding a weary traveler. Imagine, he said softly, a small garden hidden behind an old stone wall. This garden belonged to a humble gardener who planted two kinds of seeds each season. One he called doubt, and the other hope. Now, the gardener never told anyone which seeds he sowed more, but when the rains came and the sun warmed the earth, something curious happened. Rafiq leaned in, the night air cooling the heat that had wrapped itself around his thoughts like chains. You see, the old man continued, the seeds of doubt often appeared first. They sprouted as sharp weeds, twisting and winding so fast the gardener could hardly keep up. But the seeds of hope, though slower to grow, bore fruit unlike any other. They blossomed into beautiful flowers and strong vines that could support the heaviest burdens. The gardener tended them each day, choosing which to nourish, pulling out the weeds and watering the flowers with patience. The old man's voice was steady, painting a picture both simple and profound. One evening, after a fierce storm swept through the garden, the weeds seemed to have overtaken everything. The gardener sat on the edge of the soil, tired and defeated. But as dawn broke, he noticed a single flower standing tall amid the ruins, a delicate blossom soaked but unbroken. That flower was the gardener's reward for believing in hope when it was easier to surrender to doubt. Rafiq's gaze softened, his mind drawing a quiet line from the garden's story to his own tangled life. The lesson, the old man said, is that your mind is your garden, Rafiq. What you choose to feed, the seeds of hope or the thorns of despair, will determine what your life grows into. Will you nurture the few positive thoughts you find, or allow the weeds of fear and sorrow to choke your spirit? For a long moment, silence fell between them, broken only by the distant clatter of the city night. Then Rafiq whispered, I think I understand. The old man nodded with a knowing smile. Good. Now, what will you plant? That night, when Rafiq curled beneath his tattered cloak, the image of a solitary flower standing bravely against a storm lingered in his mind. It was fragile, yes, but alive. For the first time in a long while, he imagined himself not as a broken man, but as that flower, capable of surviving hardship, capable of growing. The next morning, the city awoke with its usual tumult, but for Rafiq, Something had quietly shifted. Instead of folding into resignation, he pulled his threadbare cloak tighter and stood slowly, eyes scanning beyond the usual shadows. He found a discarded piece of wood near a market stall, rough but solid. With trembling hands, he fashioned a small box, imperfect and crudely joined. That small act, seemingly insignificant, was the first seed he planted in his own garden. The days that followed were a challenge of wills. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, and the weariness in his limbs threatened to steal away his resolve. Passers-by still mostly ignored him, muttering their judgments. Old habits urged him to sink back into despair. But each time his thoughts drifted toward darkness, Rafiq recalled the image of the flower, steadfast after the storm. So he picked up a piece of scrap charcoal, and on that small wooden box he began to draw. Lines formed shapes, simple figures of birds, of suns rising over hills, of hands stretched toward the sky. Drawing did not feed his belly, but it nourished a forgotten part of his soul. Some days his hands ached too much to hold the charcoal steady. Other days, no one stopped to notice until a merchant finally offered a kind smile, or a child pressed a warm, trembling coin into his hand. Slowly, the box he carried began to attract curiosity. One afternoon, a woman with tired eyes approached him and pointed to his box. "Beautiful," she said simply, her voice soft as the breeze. Rafiq blinked, surprise flooding him. "It's just a box, but thank you." She smiled and dropped a handful of coins into the box. "Keep making your garden grow." That small encounter shimmered inside him like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was not a grand triumph, but it was proof. That single positive thought was blossoming. Weeks stretched into months. The box took on life. Bright colors appeared, shapes danced, and each new day brought a new drawing, a new idea, a new hope. The city's harshness remained, but Rafiq's spirit grew stronger, less burdened by past failures. Yet transformation was never a straight path. One chilly evening, as the crowd thickened for a festival, a drunken man stumbled into Rafiq, shoving the box and sending it crashing to the ground. The charcoal drawing smeared, the wood cracked. Laughter erupted cruelly from onlookers. Rafiq felt an old fury rise up, a scream clawing from his throat. For an agonizing moment, the darkness beckoned. But then he recalled the old man's story, the garden, the flower after the storm. He bent to gather the scattered pieces, hands shaking, vision blurry with tears. He whispered, "This flower will grow again." The days after the accident tested him more than any before. His ribs ached from falling, the box lay broken, and many told him to stop dreaming. "Why bother? You haven't changed. You're still a beggar." But something inside Rafiq refused to wither. He spent the next weeks collecting scraps of wood, old charcoal, and even rainwater to soften the rough surfaces. Slowly, bit by bit, he rebuilt the box. The cracks remained, but they became part of the beauty, each line telling a story of survival. His drawings grew bolder, stories richer. One quiet morning, a small crowd gathered near the fountain. A local craftsman, moved by the resilience in Rafiq's art, offered him work in his shop, a humble job restoring old items. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Honest, steady, filled with purpose. Rafiq accepted with trembling gratitude. Months later, the man who once felt like a shadow on the streets now stood behind a wooden bench in the workshop, hands steady, eyes bright with the joy of creating. People began to talk, not whispers of pity, but nods of respect. Children stopped by to watch the man who could turn broken things into art. The stray dog still followed him, now welcomed inside the shop, his loyal companion. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in soft pink and gold, Rafiq returned to the old sycamore tree. Beneath it sat the old man, serene as before. Rafiq approached, heart full. "I did not forget your words," he said softly. "One positive thought became many. It wasn't easy. I stumbled, I was broken again, but I kept planting that small hope." The old man's eyes twinkled with quiet pride. "Because you chose to water the flowers, not the weeds." Rafiq smiled, tears slipping down cheeks weathered by the years. I'm still afraid sometimes, but now I know that's okay. I'll keep planting. And so Rafiq discovered that the garden of the mind does not bloom overnight. It requires patience, courage, and the willingness to nurture even the smallest seed of hope.